The morning my brother called to tell me our mother had left him the house, I was standing in her kitchen. I had just finished washing the breakfast dishes I had washed every morning for the past 4 years. The same sink, the same window looking out over the garden I had planted, the same walls I had repainted twice because my mother liked a lighter shade of cream. And in that moment, holding a wet dish towel, I understood something that no legal document, no court ruling, and no amount of money could fully capture. I had been erased. Not by a stranger, by my own family. My brother had not been in that kitchen in over 2 years. He had not driven my mother to her chemotherapy appointments, had not sat beside her hospital bed at 2 in the morning, had not reorganized his entire life around her schedule and her needs. But he had a gift that I apparently lacked. He had always been the favorite, the golden boy, the one whose absence was forgiven before it was even noticed. And now, according to a will I had never seen, the house was his. I want you to understand something before I go any further. This story is not about bitterness.
It is not about greed or sibling rivalry or any of the tired narratives people reach for when a family falls apart over an inheritance. This story is about what happens when a woman who has spent a lifetime being underestimated decides quietly and deliberately to stop accepting what she is given and start claiming what she is owed. Have you ever looked back at a chapter of your life and realized that while you were busy being good, someone else was busy being strategic? That is exactly where my story begins. My name is not important. What matters is that I am a woman in my late 50s, a former paralegal with 30 years of experience, and for 4 of those years, I was my mother's full-time caregiver. I moved back into her home in the autumn she was diagnosed. I left behind a rented apartment, a part-time consulting practice, and a life I had carefully constructed after my divorce. I did it without hesitation, because she was my mother, and because I believed, perhaps naively, that love is its own kind of contract. My brother Richard lived 3 states away. He called on holidays and birthdays. He sent flowers when my mother had her surgery, and a fruit basket when she came home. He was charming on the phone and gracious at Christmas dinner, and our mother lit up whenever he walked through the door, which was never more than twice a year. I do not say this to diminish him entirely. Richard is not a villain in the cartoonish sense. He is simply a man who learned early that presence is optional when charm is abundant. He grew up understanding that in our family, the loudest love was always rewarded more generously than the quietest sacrifice. While I managed medications and medical appointments, grocery runs and insurance claims, Richard managed his image. And when our mother rewrote her will in the final year of her life, something she did without telling me, Richard's image had apparently made a very strong impression. The will left him the house outright, a 4-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood that had appreciated considerably over the decades. It was worth, at the time of her passing, just over $600,000.
I received her personal jewelry and a modest savings account that barely covered 3 months of the caregiving expenses I had personally absorbed. Have you ever felt that the people who sacrifice the most are somehow the least protected by the systems designed to recognize sacrifice? That feeling has a name. It is called filial caregiver displacement, and it is more common than most people realize. It is also, under certain legal conditions, actionable. This is where my 30 years as a paralegal became the most important asset I had ever accumulated. I did not fall apart. I did not call Richard and rage at him over the phone. I did not post grievances on social media or solicit sympathy from relatives who were already uncomfortable taking sides. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table in the house I was about to lose, and I started making a list. I listed every expense I had personally covered during 4 years of caregiving: prescription copays, home modification costs for the wheelchair ramp I had installed, groceries, utilities I had paid when my mother's fixed income fell short, transportation, medical equipment.
The lost income from the consulting work I had paused or declined entirely. I had kept receipts. I had kept calendars. I had kept records the way a paralegal keeps records, methodically and without sentiment. The total came to just over $94,000. I then spoke with an estate attorney who specialized in elder law, a woman I had worked alongside years earlier. She explained two legal avenues that most people outside the legal profession do not know exist. The first was a claim for caregiver compensation based on quantum meritu, a Latin legal doctrine meaning roughly what one has earned. The second was a potential challenge to the will itself, grounded in the documented timeline of its revision. My mother had changed her will just 8 months before her death, during a period when she was on a combination of medications known to affect cognitive clarity and decision-making. That timing mattered enormously. Richard had no idea any of this was coming. Why would he? In his experience, I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who handled difficult things without complaint and then stepped aside. He assumed I would do the same now. He assumed wrong.
The legal process took 14 months. I will not pretend it was simple or painless. There were depositions and document requests, and a period of several weeks when Richard stopped speaking to me entirely. There were moments when I questioned whether the fight was worth the cost, financially and emotionally. But I had learned something important during those 4 years of caregiving, something my mother had tried to teach me in her own imperfect way. Endurance is not the same as acceptance. Staying in a difficult situation does not mean you have agreed to be treated unfairly within it. The case never went to trial. 3 months before a scheduled court date, Richard's attorney reached out to discuss a settlement. The documented evidence of my financial contributions, combined with the medical records supporting questions about my mother's cognitive state during the will revision, had made the case uncomfortable enough that prolonging it no longer served Richard's interests. We settled. I received a sum equivalent to half the home's appraised value, along with full reimbursement of the documented caregiving expenses. Richard kept the house. But the number I walked away with was substantial enough to change the trajectory of what came next for me. I want to pause here for a moment and speak directly to anyone listening who has found themselves in a version of this story. Because this kind of injustice is not rare. It wears many faces. Sometimes it is a sibling who inherits everything. Sometimes it is a business partner who takes credit for your work. Sometimes it is a marriage in which your contributions were real and your compensation was not. The lesson I carried out of that kitchen, out of that house, and into the next chapter of my life is this: documentation is dignity. Every receipt you keep, every calendar you maintain, every professional credential you quietly hold onto is a form of self-protection. The women in our generation were often taught that good work speaks for itself. But the truth is, good work needs a paper trail. There is something else worth saying about justice after 50. It does not always arrive the way we imagined it would when we were younger. It is rarely dramatic. It does not restore everything that was taken. But it is real, and it is possible, and it belongs to any woman willing to understand the tools available to her and use them without apology. I used my knowledge. I used my records. I used the 30 years of professional experience that my family had always treated as a background detail, and I turned it into the most important legal strategy of my life. Starting over at 57 is not the ending I planned, but it is the beginning I chose. And that distinction between the life that is handed to you and the life you have the courage and the clarity to claim for yourself is perhaps the only thing worth fighting for. The house went to my brother, but the story ended on my terms, and that is something no one can take from me now.